Well, with me, Sarah Churchman, Head of Diversity at PwC, which has been publishing its gender pay for 2 years. Jemima Olowski from the Fawcett Society, which campaigns for women's equality and rights. And Ben Southwood from the free market think tank, the Adam Smith Institute. Thank you all for coming in. Jemima, first of all, will making companies publish the figures actually make a difference?
This is a really important step, and this is something that Fawcett and lots of other organisations have been campaigning for, and it's fantastic that the government have listened. Because once we've got that transparency and companies are forced to reflect on where the differences are in their organisation, that's the first step to them being able to take action. But the TUC are right that this isn't a silver bullet and there's more that we can and we need to do. We'd like to see requirements around firms actually having to also publish an action plan once they identify that they've got a large gender pay gap. And also more done around firms who don't comply with the rules. At the moment, there's no penalty really if you decide you're just not going to play ball, and that's not fair on the women who work for them or those other companies who have done it properly.
Does it not fall foul of the Equal Pay Act?
So there's a difference between unlawful unequal pay and the overall pay gap. It's illegal to pay two people different amounts of work of the same value, but that's not the only driver of the pay gap. Some of it is because men and women do different work, and the work that women does tends to be less valued. So for instance, 80% of care workers are women, and that's one of the lowest paid jobs in our economy. Some of it is because people get pushed out of work because they can't conform to old-fashioned working models, or they have unsympathetic employers who don't allow them to work flexibly. And sometimes it's because women's talent just isn't recognised by often their male bosses, so they don't get promoted or don't get the same opportunities to increase their pay. A lot of that isn't illegal, but of course it's really damaging for those women and their potential, but also for those businesses because they're not really getting the most out of their workforce.
So Sarah, your company has been publishing its gender pay results for 2 years.
2 years, yes, that's right.
What has it shown?
Well, we publish our pay gap because we believe transparency is really important. We are a business that we don't make products. Our businesses are people who deliver services to our clients, so they're our greatest asset. And we want to do right by our people. So we employ men, women, people from all different backgrounds, and it's really important, therefore, that they're treated the same, we have equal opportunities, and we pay them the same. And we've been doing equal pay audits for the last 10 years, and I think what we've found is that sometimes the driver of the difference was completely unintentional. So in our organisation, one of the fundamental reasons for the difference and the gap is because we have more men in senior roles compared to women. Now, we know that, and our diversity strategy is all about bringing women through to more senior roles. So I think the important thing is that gender pay is just one data point. It doesn't really tell the complete story. So we also publish information about our demography, how many women, how many men in senior roles. And as you say, Jemima, what are we doing to bring more women through to therefore reduce the gender pay gap at PwC?
Adam, a company like PwC auditing its gender pay gap for 10 years, publishing for 2 years, is obviously sort of been ahead of the curve on this. What do you think about all companies with more than 250 employees being forced to do it now?
Well, I agree with a lot that Jemima and Sarah have said so far, and PwC's process seems a lot better than what the government is forcing all firms with over 250 employees to do. So, as Sarah's said, they've been able to look into the details and find why men and women are paid differently within the firm. What the government's doing, I mean, I'm not really someone to say that more data is ever going to be bad, but what the government's doing might mislead more than it informs. If you just look at the mean and median, the average levels of pay for men and women, then if men and women within those firms are doing different jobs, you're going to get very strange results. It's not going to show you overall whether men and women are being paid fairly, or even whether the promotion system is fair, but just whether they employ different kinds of people. And that's why I think that the approach that PwC apparently has been in for 10 years, looking into the more details of why people are paid differently, is more interesting.
So how does that get addressed, Jemima?
I think, well, one important thing that is in the regulations is that firms are going to be asked to publish where the proportion of women in different income quartiles within their organisation. So of the top 25% of earners, how many of those are women, which does start to get into some of that. But I agree. You know, really,
but why not have to publish like for like?
Well, so that's exactly what Fawcett has been saying, that actually it would be much better if firms use this moment to do a full pay audit and really reflect on who does what types of role in their organisation, who isn't getting promoted. I mean, I think that's a really important point, that actually people within an organisation can have unconscious biases that mean they're not actually recognising the talent in front of them. And until you look at it in that type of detail, it's very difficult to work out what you as an organisation need to do. But on the whole and overall, it's better to take this big step forward to get firms in that mindset where they start reflecting on it than to just wait for more people.
Sarah, as you were saying, I mean, your company's been practicing in this way for a long time, but once it started and once the figures were published, what impact did it have? How did people within the company see it, and did things kind of change measurably?
Well, it was a big step forward, and I think most organisations think they're going to be hit with, you know, claims for discrimination, equal pay claims. Actually, our experience has only been positive amongst our people, but positive externally, people coming to us to say, why did you do it, how did you do it? So we actually have been supporting other employers in, I guess, getting their act together to be able to report. So it's been very positive, but as I said, it's just one data point. I think, you know, what's important is the commentary around that information, and I guess being quite explicit about what you are doing to address it and close the gap. I think, you know, it's quite important. We have published for 2 years, and our gap when we publish it for the second time was actually slightly worse. But that was because we were making improvements in bringing more women through to senior roles. So as we were promoted more women to senior roles, of course, they go into the next grade at the lower end of that pay banding. So the overall effect was actually to widen the gap very slightly. That's why it's important, I think, to put this into context, publish more than one data point to give a more holistic picture of the organisation.
And it's really important as well that we recognise that we live in a society that's deeply unequal and has been, you know, since business and time began, really, and that firms will find themselves, when they reflect on it, they will often find that there are inequalities in their organisation. So it's better to be open about that, like you're saying, and to kind of admit that you haven't got it right, and then to begin to move on and address it. This isn't a kind of an opportunity for organisations like Fawcett to criticise them if actually what they're going to do is use this moment to take a step forward and make a change in their organisation.
In the end, do you see the gender pay gap going completely, though, when it is, as we've been discussing, a different argument from pay equality? And if women are choosing the particular jobs for whatever reason, or working part-time for whatever reason, motherhood obviously a big factor, that won't change.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more that we can do. So for instance, at the moment, it's primarily women who take time out of work after having a baby to look after a child, and actually there are big incentives in that, in the way that, for instance, maternity pay versus shared parental leave pay is structured. But in other European countries, they have a dedicated leave period just for dads that's properly paid, so it reflects their salaries more accurately, and then more dads take it. They then get more involved in the business of raising children at home. Businesses get more used to the fact that actually men might take time out of work as well as women, and that begins to change some of the perceptions of whether women are a risk in an organisation or not. We can do much more to make sure that women are getting their chance to move to the very top. So only 5 FTSE 100 chief execs are women. Now, you know, clearly there are more than 5 fantastic women in senior positions at FTSE 100 companies, but something isn't coming through. So actually we could do more to speed that up. Fawcett's saying perhaps it's time to look at time-limited use of quotas so that we create that shift, and those women are then in positions to change the organisation more widely.
How do you see all of that, Adam?
Well, the specific example of quotas I don't think works. In Norway, where quotas have been implemented, you do see the rise to the level prescribed by the quotas in terms of the number of women on boards, but you don't tend to see knock-on effects. It doesn't seem like there's a cascading, now we realise that women are good at top-level positions. I think firms are quite eager to employ women at top-level positions, and I think they'd quite like to promote them. In fact, if you look at the rate of women promoted to senior jobs relative to their rate of application, women get promoted at higher levels than men. And if you look at...
So women aren't putting themselves forward all the time?
So women apply for top jobs less often than men do, and that's one of the main reasons why they don't get why they don't rise to those top level positions. Equally, women who never leave the workforce are promoted are more likely to make CEO than men are. It just so happens that more women tend to leave the workforce during their career. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because there are lots of valuable things in life that aren't necessarily work. But I think it plays into what we've been saying, which is that the gender wage gap is not so simple as it used to be. In the past, the gender wage gap really was people being paid different for the same work. Now, it's men and women do substantially different jobs. And actually, we see that the difference between men and women's career paths is wider in more egalitarian, more liberal countries across the world. And it doesn't even seem like the gender pay gap is a good indicator of discrimination within society. Societies with like Italy, which people perceive as very patriarchal and as being quite a discriminatory society, has a much narrower gender pay gap than the UK. And the gender pay gap may not necessarily be a good measure of discrimination.
Of course, this all points to the fact that the gender pay gap is just one measure and one part of this problem. And of
but
course
it's the measure that will be focused on under these league tables. And could it lead to pay inequality being brushed aside?
I don't think that the publishing and the greater reflection on it could lead to pay discrimination being brushed aside. I think that there is more that needs to be done. We know the EHRC, Equality and Human Rights Commission, did research last year which found every year around 54,000 women have to leave their job early as a result of getting pregnant or having a baby. That kind of discrimination still happens and affects women's lives, and that isn't about choice, it's about the way that you're treated when something changes in your life. We've done research on attitudes to inequality, and we found that people with responsibility for recruitment decisions are consistently less likely to be supportive of gender equality, so less likely to say they believe that men and women should be equal, more likely to say that they think women's rights have gone too far. So there's a lot that we can and need to do actually within the workplace, and this helps get us in the space to start doing that before we worry about some of the kind of longer term issues around whether we can ever close it or ever have perfection. We can do a lot more, we can get a lot closer.
Could I say one thing?
Very quickly.
Very quickly. I think the fact that this is being publicised is really good. I think if we had more women very aware that they should talk about pay and ask questions about their pay relative to their male peers is a good thing.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you.